data as an indisputable proof of the representation of a fact or information. But it's equally true that the same data carries with it many meanings. The ability to contextualize it and connect it to the other details is what helps us to interpret it and release the real value. Let's design to build bridges.
3, 2, 1, live. Hello everyone, this is Mirko, host of Alia Stories, and today I want to talk about an intriguing relationship between data, design, and innovation. And of course, I'm not doing alone. In this episode, I'm very happy to welcome Paolo Ciuccarelli, professor of the Northeastern University in Boston. Welcome, Paolo.
Hey, hi everyone, and ciao Mirko.
Ciao. Thank you again to be our guest. You moved to Boston last year to join to the Northeastern University, and you become one of the founder and director of the Center of Design. Tell me more about it. What is it?
Well, actually, I'm the founding director of the center, the only one, unfortunately. Okay. But I managed to get a number of interesting colleagues around me. So as soon as I shared the idea of the project, they really got engaged with that and accepted to be part of this challenge to build really like a center for design, because Northeastern is in a situation that I experienced before in Politecnico di Milano. That there is a demand at Northeastern of design by all the other disciplines, and that's something, as I said, that I experienced already. And they discovered design. They want to do design. They don't have a clear idea what design is, and so having a place where they can come to understand what design is, to practice design, and to find different versions of design, let's say, that's something that I think is part of the mission of the center. And there is this idea in Northeastern that is, it's a word, it's a concept that has been created by the president, that is humanics, and it's this idea of making technology more humane. And I think that that's what design can do for them. So they have a lot of all the branches of this science, and they're very strong in certain areas like network science, for example. But there was this missing piece in order to achieve this idea of humanics. So if you want to make technology more humane, you need design. So that's part of the mission. So I invited 7 different colleagues that represent 7 different versions, I said, of design, but they are like bridges, bridging design with other disciplines. So there are 7 doors in the center, and every door is like a door to another discipline. So you open the door and you connect design with robotics, or with architecture, with health, with robotics, I say, but mechanical engineering and computer science. All this faculty that work across this bridge. So it's essentially a center of gravity for interdisciplinary design research, and we're both trying to make those bridges stronger, but also to create other new bridges. So incubating new bridges, because all these faculties that were already working on their bridges, but now we have also we had the funds to create a new idea of a bridge that is pointing to cybersecurity, surveillance, and all these problems that comes with, especially with the controlling systems that we are all the technological platforms are putting in place, and then so it's both a place where to make existing bridges stronger, but also to incubate new ones. And that's more or less the vision. And we launched in January, and then after a month we had to stop a little bit for the pandemic. But it's funny, because one of the main pillars of my mission statement for the center was the space, the meaning of space, and that's something that I had to reimagine in a way after the pandemic.
But for sure, you had to work a lot over the past month in this direction. And actually, it's super interesting how all that kind of bridge you mentioned are normally no space where people are thinking about design sometimes. Like you mentioned cybersecurity or robotics. It's not actually the kind of field where people are, when thinking about design, are directly connect to this kind of space. It would be very interesting to see what can be the result of your work over there. Tell me if I'm wrong, but now recently you just joined another initiative from the Northeastern University with the Rio Institute, right? Something about the space of innovation where actually data and design play kind of role.
Yeah, that's really interesting because I think it's a very accurate, I would say, representation of research can the peculiar way of funding research that I think it's difficult to imagine in Europe or in Italy at least. This new institute that is called Ro Institute by the name of the couple that funded it. So is essentially something that is the mix of the will of different stakeholders. So you have someone like David Rowe and his wife Barbara that they lived their life in Maine, in Portland, and they wanted to do something for the city. Then you have the mayor and the government, of course, that are interested in developing more the city and the state. And then you have the university that has the talent and the power to contribute to this development. And they joined forces to create something new from scratch. So it is a new institute that now exists physically that didn't exist a year ago. Everything started from the will of a couple of individuals, that decided to give $100 million. That's not to create something for their city. They used to live in a close city, not Portland, but of course Portland is where the institute took place, and it was inevitable to be there. I mean, and what is interesting about this project is not only that they wanted to target cutting edge technologies, so it's mostly based on AI and biotech and all this very important. I wouldn't say trendy, but it's a trend because it's really important now. And so, and it's all about these technologies. And what is interesting is the fact that design is there. It's not explicitly there because it's not mentioned in the project, but well, I've been invited for representing the way design, but design is, if you look at the description of all the different areas, there is design there, in all of that. So if you go, for example, and you look at how this idea of experiential AI is described, you find this idea of human technologies, the idea of empathy. So some terms that clearly refers to design. So it's all this idea of cutting edge technology, but when you start then unfolding these terms, these areas, then inevitably you have design there. And so I'm into a box, the bucket I'm in is computer science basically, but of course what I will try to bring, I would try to bring design in the broadest sense. So not only data visualization and information design, that is my field, but hopefully all the other branches that we have in the Center for Design and probably in the college I work with. So, but it's interesting, this idea that you can create from scratch something cutting edge and with someone, so like merging the interests of matching the interests of different stakeholders.
To me, it makes a really sense, especially with what you say before now, like you are focused to build this kind of bridge through the perspective of design, and you need this kind of bridge for connecting different things happening. That's part of, for me, of the condition to create innovation. I think it's actually a great thing what's happening over there, and I think it's a kind of necessary things having this kind of design perspective melt in this kind of program. Which sound very interesting. I'm very happy for your new challenge.
Yeah, there are two other things that I think are very interesting. The fact that you have both teaching, education, and research together. Yep. So it's both a graduate program and a research institute, and that you have both university and companies. So there are 11 companies, if I'm right, that joined immediately the initiative, and actually the new building will be built in the premises of one of the companies. So it's something that is, the idea is really to have all the stakeholders around the table in order to make sure that innovation will be real innovation. So it's not pure research, it's something that is will be as soon as possible applied by some of the most important companies in Maine, like
change
labs and WEX. They're very important companies around there, and so it's really an ecosystem of innovation. It's not just the university alone pushing for that.
That's great. But okay, I want to go a little bit now back in time, because I believe a valuable perspective, as your in this case, always come from people who had a kind of unconventional journey. And you definitely are part of this kind of group of people. How did you arrive here in this kind of, can I say, blurry space between design and science?
Yeah, it's definitely a blurred space, the one I'm now. And I was yesterday was design and data visualization in the field of digital humanities. So dealing with humanities and data from the past and history and philosophy and literature. And so it's really a very, very interesting space where you can, you have numbers, you have algorithms, and then you have this very humane data on yeah, that's okay. So that's really I'm really excited about that. And maybe it's not a chance that I'm in that blurred space, given my path. As you say, it is probably not the most conventional path you can imagine for someone working in data visualization. I started, I'm an architect by training. So, and I now see that as a plus, definitely, because it's such a broad discipline where you can do really, at least, if I think how the program was conceived when I studied architecture, was really open, and you could really plug into the core of the program basically anything. So from economics to history, of course, to graphic design that I enjoyed a lot, and communication. And so it wasn't really architecture purely based on building. So you could build your own path. And so half of the courses were electives, as we say now, as they say in the United States. So you could choose and build your own profile. And that's what I did, in a way, combining also my passions. So I started to code very early with my Commodore 64, and I was
a very generational icon for a lot of people.
Do you remember assembly, hexadecimal coding?
My God, yes.
But I've been always passionate about communication, graphic design, advertising, branding, all these kind of things. And then I managed to put all that together. And then it's a long journey. It's I don't have the time to tell all the story. But on a certain point, I discovered data. But data it was just a material, for a designer, for an architect. It wasn't the goal. So visualizing data is not the goal. It has never been the goal for me. So, and that's, I think, was my strength in a way. So not having, my roots in data and in data technologies. So I just use that as a way to enrich my representations that are, meant to represent the complexity of a phenomenon. So it's not, visualizing data is part of that, but it's essential, it's important, but it's not the core. And certainly it's not the end goal. And so is visualization in a way, because so far I used visualization because it was the most common way to represent data. But now we have data physicalization, data sonification. That's something I recently discovered and I'm researching on now. And so you have different way now to represent data, and maybe visualization won't be the main one in the future. And when we have most of the exchanges of data that are machine to machine, so you don't see data and you don't want to see the data, and so you have to design in a different way a system or something that is it's not visible, not in the form of this screen or the visualization that we have in mind. So it's probably something in the behavior that represents the data that you have behind. So yeah, it's from architecture. A couple of days ago I was talking about the idea of information architecture that got lost in a way. But if you read the description, I think that's what data visualization should be now. So this idea of a system, of an architecture, I think that's really important. And that was the starting point and of people, designers and architects working in the field, but then it got, as I said, a little bit lost. But it could be the time now to get back to that and to start thinking it again in terms of systems and architecture, and not just in terms of visualizations and products. I mean, this idea of a system of creating order in a space like you do in architecture. The description of information architecture as Richard Saul-Wurman did in his book, it was, many years ago, but I think he was right in this idea. But then, so definitely architecture was a very important milestone. But I see that only now. It always happens that you don't realize what you're doing.
Correct me if I'm wrong, because actually I saw your profile, but you are in this space from a long time right now, because before the Northeastern University, you've been in Milan and the Politecnico, correct? And you've been more or less on the same kind of space.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I started to play with this idea of visualization in 2004, actually. So it's a really long time ago. But as I said before, I mean, it was not data visualization. It was using visualization, mainly diagrams. So like, concept maps or something like that to represent the complexity of a system. So system diagrams, that's where we started. And it was a course that was called Density. And then that's the name that also the research lab I founded at Politecnico got. But that was the idea. And then in the first iteration of this 2-year course, there was no, if I remember well, no data. There were networks, but no nodes and links representing the different stakeholders and the different actors of a system. But then we, in maybe a couple of years after, maybe three years after, we started to populate these diagrams with data to make them more alive, more rich, and more, meaningful. But that's everything started, and 16 years ago definitely was something kind of new for design. It was an intuition. It was probably again a combination of the things I liked, like visualization and
structure, you say, and I think probably also the fact that the spread and now the evolving of that kind of digital environment, internet was actually building around us. I'm pretty sure that gave to you much more opportunity to play with the data, share with the data, collecting data, because it's insane.
If I think what we have now, I mean, having that 15 years ago. But in fact, what I see, if you look at the results of the courses we do, we did at Politecnico, it's in 15 years, really students managed to create, in a semester something that was inconceivable, 5 years ago. And scraping data from the web, creating web pages, infographics, and interactive installations. I mean, whatever in 4 months from scratch. I mean, that's something that is that's also fascinating. So the pace of the evolution over the technologies around data, it's incredible, and it opens really for a lot of opportunities. Unfortunately, this is something that is still in the hands of experts or students, and it's far from having an impact on citizens, on a society in a broader sense. That's unfortunate, and the interest around that is very low still, and it's also a barrier. I mean, the thing we do in the university too far now from what is in reality. I mean, that's even in business, even in big companies. I mean, things are much slower, unfortunately. I was optimistic 15 years ago. I was, but the pace of innovation outside the university is still a little slow. Could be a little faster, in my opinion.
Well, probably now all the pandemic and the COVID time we are experiencing is going to play as an accelerator in this kind of change and transformation, I believe. But I want to talk a little bit more like from a data point of view with you, because I'm pretty sure you can give me much more, how can I say, perspective around the kind of things. I'm curious to asking you because often I saw working in business with a big client, a small client, doesn't matter, because more or less the situation are always the same. When talking about data, you arrive at the point where you discuss on the meaning of the data. And unfortunately, a piece of information or a number or just a bit, is always recognized as a tangible proof of truth because we have a number, it's representing something concrete. But I learned also data carry multiple kind of meanings, which create more challenge. To use a metaphor for understanding what I'm talking about, if you are a guy, if you see a guy with an axe in the wood, it's a kind of normal. But if you see the same guy in a New York subway, it's kind of scary. But still be the same guy, the same kind of information. No? How can a design perspective in that way help to give a meaning to those numbers? I mean, how do you help actually to understand the meanings of the data you collect?
Well, you're right. I mean, I like the metaphor, but I think it's appropriate. I mean, it describes a lot it describes the importance of context, and that's what often is missing, and that's what gives meaning to a data and to a data visualization. But sometimes you don't have it, and that's a problem. I mean, because maybe the person that built or designed the visualization, had certain context in mind, but you don't have it in the data visualization, and so the person on the other side, the reader, the user, will not get it. So he or she will build her own interpretation of the data inevitably, because that's what happens. And you don't know because you didn't put the context, and so was the user putting the context on the data, and then you don't know what would be the end result. So that's where often that's where is the design space often. So to create the context that is needed in order to try to control what is the result of, what is the impact, what is the insight that probably that person will get. So I usually say that you will never know 100% what will happen on the other side.
Sure.
But you can try to control that, adding some complexity to the visualization, starting from a point that is usually the usual analytical charts that we are all familiar with, and that's for the sake of accessibility. So of course we use bar charts and pie charts because people know that. I mean, that's at least what we can hope they know, because that's something that maybe they learned at school. But then you can, if you want to, go for the easy way and use this familiar patterns, but then you can start adding something to that in order to, depending on the user, as a designer, you are able to understand what is the user, what is the context, what is the purpose of that visual artifact I'm creating. And then depending on that, you decide what you can add, or what you should add, and you take responsibility for that. And that's the design space. I mean, and all for trying to get in control of what is the perception on the other side. You may say, I mean, that's this control can be, scary. People say, well, wow, you're controlling the mind and the perception of a phenomenon, but that's what you do in any case. So even if you present, a very simple, apparently, objective chart, like a bar chart, very simple with no addition, it will in any case create an impression that you are building actually. So you made some choices, like the proportions of the axis. There are a number of choices that you do even without adding. So even with the most puristic chart of bar chart you can imagine, you are in any case orienting the perception, and you choose the bar chart instead of another chart. You choose this combination of values, this axis, and so you're creating an impression in any case. So I'm not scared about that. I'm scared about the idea that that the visualization is neutral. That is not. I mean, it's never neutral. So with this idea in mind, we have to take responsibility and as much as possible add what is needed in order to make sure that on the other side you have an impact, the impact that is expected in this situation. And of course it depends if you're a business company, if you're an organization like a government, if you're an NGO, and you have your purposes and you have to fulfill your duties. What is your goal in the society? And of course, if you are an NGO, of course you advocate for a cause, and that's your purpose, and you have to be honest and put all of that context into the visualization and show it and make it evident. And if you are a government, I mean, you're supposed to drive the society in a certain way, and then governments can have different ideas, different visions, and I'm totally fine with seeing that in the visualization. And companies as well, I mean, they have their own heritage, their brand identity, and I want to see that, their values, and I want to see that in the visualization, honestly, not hidden behind this idea of a neutral language that, in my opinion, doesn't exist. So truth is a very complicated word, and there are a number of truths that can be equally interesting, a number of voices that deserve to be represented through visualizations.
And tell me if I'm wrong, because I also think now the ability to visualize something, it's make much more easy to understand the complexity, but at the same time, now, as you say, now making certain kind of choice, you try to and give a purpose to the visualization too. You are looking for to give a meaning. You're looking for a possible intention of the data itself, and that actually is what can open different perspective, how you can look at this kind of this data in a way you never did before, and then discover something. Is correct?
Yeah, sure. And that's also one of the possible ways to make use of visualization. I mean, visualization, every visualization opens a perspective, a certain perspective in the phenomenon you're observing, and hopefully it happens often that, especially if you can work also with the data behind the visualization, can lead to discover something new. And this happens often when you apply design in all, let's say, the supply chain of data, and it happens less if you use visualization just at the end, because the data has been already structured, and so you just visualize and what has been already incorporated into the data structure you get. But if you are open to accept design, since the beginning, you can use visualization before the data. So just what is the question we're trying to answer? What is the problem? What is the issue? What is the phenomenon? What we want to have? What we expect? What are our needs? And then you try to visualize that, and then maybe you discover that the data you have are not the right one. So maybe that you need some other data to integrate what you have in order to get that visualization, that idea. So what you say is true, but it happens more and more as you accept design as being part of all the process of transforming data into knowledge, not just the end of the chain. That's making that idea that you had, that table or that structure, looking better. That's not, of course, the idea of design.
Actually, what you just say now, it make very clear to me what you said in the beginning about how design is connected to many other things, also like the architecture of the data itself, how you connecting the data, how you're thinking, what you're looking for. It's make much more clear now how this kind of expertise, it must be definitely a profession, and we need actually new kind of talents in the market for helping businesses embrace all this kind of spectrum of capabilities, from how visualize, how structure the data, how collecting the data and how to figure out how to give a meaning to this kind of data is super, super interesting. I have one of the latest question for you, because now we are running a little bit late. I mean, I would love to talk with you about data a lot of this point because it's so fascinating. But in particular now, I was reading an article where I think this is the data coming from the past year, in 2019. But more or less, now we produce 2.5 petabytes of data every day in the world. It's kind of an incredible number. And we also know we have, for sure, an exponential increase of power for computation and solution for data tracking, like a sensor. And on top of that, we are building also now artificial intelligence. I mean, it's an incredible structure, very complex. This is great. But at the same time, I feel like it's scary now because it's an invisible world. And humans have a fear for what they doesn't see. Do you think design and what you're doing, aside just giving a meaning to the data, it can help to remove this kind of fear and make this invisible world more visible and transparent? And this transparency accelerate the kind of innovation in business you mentioned at the beginning is missing a little bit in the market.
Definitely. I mean, but this works at two different levels. I mean, this idea of making that visible, all of that is important at two different levels. So the first one is more, let's say, pragmatic and business oriented. I mean, it's the fact that if you don't make that visible in somehow, but it doesn't mean visualization, but as I said, creating systems, products, and interfaces more generally, of all this stack. I mean, you don't get value, so you don't build value actually if you don't create the right interfaces for that. And it honestly is really impressive, and it's like a paradox, the money we spend on building this infrastructure, so creating data, and without knowing for what we are doing that. and it's this idea that because we can have data, we should. I mean, it's it doesn't lead to that much value, I think. And some companies are struggling with creating value because they don't know what to use that data for, and they are. It's a cost. I mean, it costs a lot to create all this data. So first, I mean, you have to make that visible, tangible. You have to allow people to experience that data, because otherwise you don't have value. On the other side, there is the need of transparency that comes from ethics, from what I think is the end goal, at least in a university or in an educational context, that is to make people understanding what is the point of working with data, and what is the impact on society. And that's another reason for making that visible, because in order to make people understand and to try to engage them and to make them part of that dialogue, because again, otherwise
Totally.
On a different level will not work. So we will never have, the European Union is investing a lot of money in big data driven policy making processes, but a policy making process based on data will never work without the citizens. And if they don't understand all that is happening around data, and you don't build these walls that you need in order to have a vision of what's happening inside that, it will never work, because they don't feel engaged and they don't have the capacity to engage in the dialogue around data. So yeah, for two different reasons, but two important reasons, I think this need of making data transparent, visible, tangible, it's fundamental, and that's where design is.
Great. Well, we are almost on the end right now, and I love the conversation we had. I would love to stay here and talking much more, because I feel like it's a never-ending topic of this one, with a lot of kind of insight we can actually explore. But maybe we can have another chance in the future. Before closing this episode, I want to remind everyone is watching or listening to subscribe Alia Stories in YouTube or Instagram. And if you want to know more about Paolo Ciuccarelli and Northeastern University, you can find all the links and information in the description here below. Paolo, thank you very much for your time. It was such a pleasure talking with you.
It was my pleasure. My pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
Fantastic. Thank you very much.
Thank you.